Okay, so here we are, second one for Thursday. We're going to jump right in with the Soho Theatre apologising for pro-Palestine comedian, I use that term very loosely, yells "get out of my show" at an audience member. You can just imagine the audience member's ethnicity, or maybe religion, or maybe both. Anyway, we'll jump in, see what's been going on. Oh, I think we've just all zapped back to about 1932, haven't we? Anyway, let's go.
Because a theatre in central London, the Soho Theatre, has apologised after Jewish audience members were made to feel unsafe and threatened after comedian Paul Currie said to have pulled out a Palestinian flag and yelled, get out at a man who didn't want to do the same. It's a pretty bleak story that a theatre in central London, there is a strong Jewish community in London, of course, and people are genuinely feeling unsafe and targeted.
Well, didn't they have a lot of trouble in the early 1930s with, what's his name, Mosley, who's leading the black shirts, the fascists, whatever they were called, and they used to do similar. They used to go around Golders Green area and the areas of the East End where there was a large Jewish population, working class people, and there was nightmares, no end of bleeding street battles and riots and one thing and another. So, are we heading that way? Because it starts in the theatre. Yes? Try telling Abraham Lincoln that, you know. Anyway, he called himself a comedian, but from what I can gather, I've checked him out, his comedy was visual, and he didn't actually, he was non-verbal. The whole set was non-verbal until he got the flag out and everybody got up and started cheering and this, that and the other. And the Jewish members of audience just sat down. And for some reason, he managed to spot them, for whatever reason. And then he found his voice and started being rude to them. Apparently, his visual comedy consisted of eating cornflakes and spitting them at the audience. So, I mean, I don't know where I am with this, but I wouldn't have found that funny, you know. It's amazing what the left find amusing, isn't it? Yes. Picking on two people that have got literally nothing to do with anything that's going on in the world. You know, it's like having to go at a couple of Russian people because of the Ukraine, isn't it? I mean, the Russian people are over here. They're not in Russia. And even if they were in Russia, it's not the Russian people, is it? You know? And it's the same. I remember in the 70s, I think I've shared this before, I think I've overshared it, being Catholic. I didn't ask to be, I was born it. And the nuns sometimes used to have to go out wearing their own clothes, because of the situation in Britain where the IRA was blowing up everything they could get hold of in Britain and killing exponentially, whatever the word is. Exponentially, you know, Gertrude. So I can remember a nun saying to me, you have to be prudent, Gertie. You must be prudent. I didn't know what that meant, but I remember the song. Do you remember the song? What's her name? Chrissy Hind? Dear Prudence. I thought that was cool, so I thought, whatever it is, I'll be that. And here I am all these years later, through the generations, you know. I don't know whether I'm prudent or not, probably not. But this was the situation, and I learned never to tell anybody I was Catholic. Luckily, I didn't speak with an Irish accent. You know, there was a lot of people that did. Whether they got it, I'm sure. Well, there was quite a few Catholics fitted up by security services and the police. That's well documented, historical fact. Spent years and years in prison, and it took them like decades and decades to get out and prove their innocence. Whether there was actual tension from the British population towards the Irish-speaking Catholics in Britain, I don't know. I was a child, but even I knew not to say I was a bleeding Catholic. You know what I mean? Don't wear a crucifix. Don't say you're a Catholic. Just keep your head down. Mind your own business. Keep your nose clean, because it was terrible. And to blame two people that just happen to be Jewish for what's going on the Gaza Strip at the moment, because if you go on any social media platform, you will see just as many Jewish people standing up bravely and speaking out against Netanyahu and saying that they're not doing it in my name. This is outrageous. Even the people that have got loved ones still there that are held hostage have been going mental over there and having protests and storming the parliament or Knesset, whatever it's called, and really speaking out because they just want the hostages back. And all of us are welcome to look on any social media platform and you will see children. Oh, I don't want to speak about it. It's just terrible. You'll see what's going on and it's absolutely outrageous. And you cannot say that two random people that happen to be Jewish, that have chosen to live in like Britain as opposed to bleeding Israel, yeah, and didn't actually want to get up and cheer for whatever reason. Maybe, you know, they have families that are impacted by this whole debacle, were made to leave the theatre as it transpires. It's just disgusting. As I say, it reminds me of 1930s, pre-Germany or even Britain before the Second World War rather. Get with the programme, come on, go. Second World War. Oswald Mosley and all his bleeding millions of mental people. Right, let's go.
Frankly. Bill.
This story made my blood boil. You know,
such a lot of blood to boil, my sweetheart.
I believe in the rights of Palestinians, but this extremist behaviour on the fringes of society that says Palestinians totally right, Israel totally wrong, is a million miles away from the solution.
Well, let's move away from that, because it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. To be honest, I think they're all bleeding wrong. Hamas and the IDF and whoever, Netanyahu wants to keep it going, because the minute it stops, his arse is going to go into jail, or at very least out of office. What's going on is actually an outrage against mankind. Of course it is. I don't think a so-called comedy, however bad the comedy was, the non-verbal spitting cornflakes at the audience comedy that went on for apparently an hour, I mean, you know what I mean, it was quite tenuous, isn't really the place to be making statements about what is actually going on there in real time. Working people, normal people, it doesn't matter what class they are, people, everyday people that have got nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with Jewish or Hamas or anything, having their life. I've seen people that have lost their whole families. And like, you see a picture of the family before all this happened, there's about 28, 30 people, and they're all gone. You know, because of this. And to bring it up in the thing, and to virtue signal, because he's a lefty as well. And he also says, because he's from Belfast, so he thought he had the right to start talking about this sort of thing. He had no right whatsoever to talk about it. And I don't think a so-called comedy event is anywhere that you start, because it diminishes what's happening. And it brings it low to, and it brings it to this. It brings it to this paulcurrie geezer. Yeah, and they all shouted and screamed at the two Jews until they left. And then clapped and cheered once they went. So they made it wasn't even a cheap joke, was it? Because it was bullying of the highest order, it's persecution, and not comedy. To be honest, I think everyone in the audience should go back to the club, the theatre, and ask for their money back, because they did go to see comedy. And that wasn't really what I'd call comedy. It was absolutely disgusting, disgraceful, but this is the tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. And I knew this back in about 1986 when Thatcher, it's 1986 #/7, when they actually stopped teaching history as a core subject in school. It's now just a chosen subject. I think it comes under humanities, actually. You get a bit of geography, a bit of history, and it's basically about nothing to do with what they should be taught. And a lot of the left just leave school pig shit ignorant. Did I say that, Gertie Rude? How very rude of you, dear. Let's go on. Come on, sweetheart, what's happened?
You know, if we're going to get peace in the Middle East, it's going to involve compromise, it's going to involve give and take, it's going to involve listening to each other. And that kind of behaviour, attacking...
Exactly, I totally agree. But I tell you one or two things it's not going to involve. It's not going to involve a comedian in some seedy little back-blooming street theatre that nobody's heard of. Soho Theatre, I've never heard of it. Apparently it's in Soho. Well, you know, yeah, tells you all you need to know. Soho House, Soho area, Pawnee area, whatever. Yeah, down at Hill. And Soho Theatre, it doesn't involve the Soho Theatre. It doesn't involve some Mickey Mouse bleed Northern Irish comedian that no one's heard of. Apart from, in a bad way, he's probably finished his career, to be honest. And it doesn't involve two random, just happen to have been born Jewish people that love comedy and went at the last minute to watch what they thought was going to be a funny stand-up comedy show for an hour. It didn't involve them. It's nothing to do with them. I mean, if it had anything to do with them, they'd be wearing a uniform, packing a bleeding pistol, and they'd be over the Gaza. They're not. They're over here, living their best lives, minding their own bleeding business. It's not their fault. Just like it wasn't my fault. I happened to be Catholic when the IRA was blowing up the whole of bloody Britain. I mean, you know these people, they are so dull-witted. And I mean, it's like I've said before, ignorance is the most frightening thing on this earth, because it's ignorance that will end all mankind. It's ignorance that's caused, like, species to go extinct. It's ignorance that causes, well, this sort of shit as well, doesn't it, really? You know, say no more. It's ignorance that causes us all to be on here every day looking at the marklets, right, rather than actually tackling what really is going on in the world. Ignorance on their part, obviously not mine. I mean, there's no way I'm ignorant. Okay, I am. I'm pig shit thing. Right, let's go.
King someone because they didn't stand for the Palestinian
But I mean,
flag is totally unacceptable.
the audience member claimed that the comedian told the man, "Get out of my show, get the F out of here," and then continued to swear. Apparently other members of the audience joined in, shouting "Get out" and "Free Palestine" until the young man left.
And this is all because
Now,
he
this is
stand
mob
up and
mentality.
applaud the
It's two.
Mob mentality.
It's him and his
I
friend.
think it also kind of points to a wider issue we have, which is this kind of whole thing where if you don't agree with me, you're wrong.
Well, I mean, the left, most of them have been to college and university. It's quite frightening, really, isn't it, you know, to the levels of what they don't know. I mean, the thing about Palestine, I don't want to be unfashionable, but Palestine didn't actually exist, per se. It was a mandate that we were in charge of, and before that, I think it was Egypt, and before that was the Ottoman Empire. And what you found in the history, if you look at the history of that region, Arabs and Israelis were quite happily living together. You know, especially up to the First World War. It was after the First World War, then the Second World War, you had Lawrence of Arabia and all that old hooey going on. The oil, blah-de-blah. And then 1917, I think he wrote it on the back of a serviette, didn't he? At the Ritz or the Dorchester Hotel. And wrote something about, you can have that area. And this is what's all transpired. But Palestine actually isn't actually existing as a country, legally, apparently. So what we need to say is maybe they need a country. There you go. I'm being really unfashionable. I'm being really out of order, aren't I? The Palestinian people need a country. They need peace. Everybody needs to stop bombing them, especially the women and the children and even the innocent men that are suffering. It's a humanitarian absolute crisis, and it's an outrage. And it's diminished by people like this bleeding Paul Currie chucking a couple of random Jewish people out of his bleeding seedy old theatre in Soho that no one's heard of and probably will never hear of again.
You know, this polarising of opinion, which we see all over social media. You know, any flag that he got out, right? Everyone in the audience has to agree. Everyone has to applaud. No, this was really, really shocking. Again, an example of the way we you know, anti-Semitism has become a very dangerous and difficult issue. But also,
I mean, he's Billy Big Bollocks, isn't he? At the end of the day, because if I think of it, would he have got a British flag out at a similar set in a Catholic area in Belfast? Would he? I mean, not nowadays, but. I mean, nowadays they're marching about different things, which we won't talk about here. And the Irish are getting proper... Well, they're getting butthurt over there, aren't they? Yes, there's a plot afoot. People are very unsettled in Ireland, but not because of the Irish-English thing this time. They got new beef. But if he was generally a Johnny Big Balls, he'd have done his set in Northern Ireland, wouldn't he? And see how far he got over there, because he wouldn't have got very far. Go on.
Also, kind of, as I say, speaking, I think, to the fact that, you know, and comedians seem to think this kind of thing is funny.
Comedian?
To somehow...
It's not as funny as bleeding herpes.
The audience feel embarrassed, and then, you know, you're not on my side, you must be wrong. If you don't agree with my opinions, you must be wrong. We see a lot of comedians doing this. Yeah. Somehow it has become a, you know, some sort of staple, particularly, I have to say, of left-wing comics. That's what
it is left-wing, it is, because I mean, they're not that bright, are they, you know? I mean, that's why there's no comedy on the BBC anymore. The people they have up there, they just hector and browbeat, basically, the same as this. And it's virtue signalling. They try and spin their comedy around virtue signalling. So rather than being... And they think it's actually edgy, for some reason. They don't realise that they've just took the whole world back to sort of 1931, #/32.
Essentially what it says is, you're not welcome in my show.
I hope he wasn't wearing a black shirt, you know.
Israel in
any
shape or
unfortunate.
form, or if you won't stand and clap for the Palestinian flag. I mean, do we live in a free society or not? Because sometimes it feels like there's a lot of pressure.
Why would he stand and clap for a bleeding flag when he got there to watch some comedy? As I say, I think they should all go back and ask for their money back, you know, because I don't find it funny. I don't find anything spitting bleeding cornflakes at the audience, just as well I wasn't there. Cheek of it.
Well, I mean, that's certainly what was coming across here. And do you know what this cries out for me is we need to develop a culture of being able to disagree agreeably.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this guy is a million miles away from
He's a bully.
that kind of mindset.
He's a bully.
And frankly, he ought to be ashamed of himself.
It is extraordinary.
And he's actually causing this. So every time that people of that faith get tackled in the street or get shouted at and get called names or whatever, or I hesitate to say worse, let's hope nothing worse happens. But it has happened sporadically all over the world. Unsuspecting people that just look a bit Jewish have been treated really badly. I remember in the First World War, apparently people that had Dachshunds, do you know what Dachshunds are? Because they're German, they're long, like we used to call them sausage dogs. Long, short-legged, but long dogs. And they were just battered to death in the street by people because they were German. I mean, that is how people are. I mean, obviously not us lot, but the great hoi polloi of people, ignorant, bleeding, whatever, muppets, yeah, were beating the dogs to death in the street because they were German. Well, because the name of them was German. I suppose the German Shepherds got it as well, didn't they, darlings? Maybe they called them Alsatians. Is Alsatian in Germany? No one knows. No one cares. Come on.
The flag of one side of a conflict, saying everyone has to stand up and applaud that flag, and then handing out someone who refused to do so.
It's not even funny.
Standing against that sort of mob mentality should really be applauded from where I'm sitting. But
well, if the police weren't so indolent, they should actually go and arrest him for a hate crime. And that's where I am on the subject, because he perpetuated a hate crime. He made him feel really bad, and there was two of them, him and his friend. I think his friends took a back seat. They just went at the last moment to see what they would build as a comedy show. They didn't know they were going to be treated like this, and it's outrageous. And at the very least, they should have their money back. Well, to be honest, the whole audience should. But I think it says a lot about mob mentality. Because to be fair, if I was there, I wouldn't have stood up. I wouldn't have stood up either. I wouldn't have cheered either. Nothing to do with that. It's just wrong. It's just pure ignorance. I'd be heckling him, I would. I'd be like, where's the bleeding comedy, you know? Anyway, I think I've said enough, probably rambled on too much. It's ignorance again, isn't it? I'm going to keep saying it. Ignorant, shit, pick thick. There you go. Over and out.